Welcome to Capitol Confidential, a podcast from the Times-Union Capitol Bureau about all things New York State government and politics. I'm Amanda Fries. On this episode, we'll talk about New York receiving its first batch of coronavirus vaccines.
Every state has come up with their own plan, and they've submitted it to the CDC.
We'll discuss the accusation by a former economic advisor accusing Governor Andrew Cuomo of sexual harassment.
It's just not true.
And we'll hear from State Senator-elect Michelle Hinchey on her vision for the 46th Senate District.
We've got to make sure that we're protecting our resources. It's the only way that we can continue to live.
Stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times-Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring in you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times-Union member today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome to the Capitol Confidential Roundtable. I'm Amanda Fries, and I'm joined by Capitol reporter Ed McKinley and DC reporter Emilie Munson. Thanks so much for joining me today, folks. So today we have a couple of topics that we want to discuss, and I want to start off with news over the weekend. A former Governor Cuomo staffer, Lindsey Boylan, alleged that Governor Andrew Cuomo had sexually harassed her during her time as a staffer in the executive chamber. And I am going to pass that on to Ed, who can perhaps give us a brief summary of what is going on there. I see that the governor even responded today during his briefing about this allegation.
So what Ms. Boylan said specifically was that Governor Cuomo, quote, sexually harassed me for years. She said that he constantly commented on her appearance and that he would grill her about her work, and that it was widespread and other people saw this going on. She also tweeted similar allegations last week about the environment in the governor's office being toxic. And she said that he keeps a very tight circle and no one else is sort of in the know. She said that he abuses his power over other people. She said that if people weren't deathly afraid of him, they'd be saying the same thing and you'd already know the stories. And she said that she hears from a lot of people when she talks about this. So obviously her specific claims about being personally sexually harassed by the governor, we have no way of knowing whether that's true directly, and only people who were directly involved could say. So what I did on Sunday was contacted a group of former women who used to work for Governor Cuomo, about 20 of them, and asked them to weigh in on what the culture was like working there. So they can't speak, of course, to the specifics of what Ms. Boylan experienced, but I was curious if other women who had worked there had experienced a similar culture. Of the 3 people I spoke with, they had been there for about 15 years combined. They said, that wasn't the experience. They said that Cuomo could be sharp with people and that he was very direct, but they thought that was sort of par for the course. And as for what the governor said, he had his press secretary issue a denial. Some old personnel records started floating around about Ms. Boylan that showed that she left her job after a few people accused her of harassing subordinates in her office. And the governor today, twice during his press conference, said,
Look, I fought for and I believe a woman has the right to come forward and express her opinion. And express issues and concerns that she has, but it's just not true.
And then he stopped there, full stop. So that's kind of where we're at with the story right now. But I am continuing to try to corroborate Ms. Boylan's claims. I'm sure that a bunch of other reporters are trying to do the same thing, and I would be surprised if there weren't more information emerging from this in the coming days and weeks.
Did you get a chance to speak with Ms. Boylan herself?
So I called Ms. Boylan last week, but she didn't respond. I called her a couple times and texted her. And then she tweeted out on Sunday after she issued her allegations against Governor Cuomo, where she said I don't trust reporters. I'm not going to talk to any journalists. It's worth noting that she's also running for office right now for Manhattan Borough President, and she previously ran for Congress.
Sounds like we'll be continuing to follow that story as it develops. And now we're going to turn our attention to the much anticipated coronavirus vaccination. The governor this morning had an intensive care nurse from Queens who received is it the first vaccination in the country, or is it just in New York?
It was definitely the first in New York. It looked like other media outlets were reporting that it was likely the first in the country or potentially the first in the country, but I didn't see anyone that sort of definitively was able to pin down that it was.
Dr. Chester, it all worked, the kit from your end?
Everything worked perfectly, thank you.
And you're feeling well?
Governor Cuomo, I'm feeling well.
So exactly how is the distribution going to work? Emilie might be able to kind of lay out that process. I know on a federal level, there's a little bit of coordination. And then once the vaccines get to the states are determining which populations and areas receive the vaccinations first.
Yeah, that's correct. So for the Pfizer vaccine is going to start its journey from the Pfizer facility in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And Pfizer is packing its own vaccines into special temperature controlled shipping containers that are GPS tracked. And Pfizer is going to deliver these vaccines directly to UPS and FedEx. And UPS and FedEx will ship the vaccine to the places where the vaccine will be administered, like pharmacies and hospitals. And in some cases, the Pfizer vaccine will go to kind of a temporary stopping point before it goes to its final destination. And in New York, there are a number of regional storage facilities for the vaccine that Governor Cuomo has set up. So I think in most cases, the vaccine will travel there and then head to its final destination. And it's a little bit different process for the Moderna vaccine, which may be approved as early as the end of this week. The Moderna vaccine is going to start out from the company's facility just outside of Boston or another site that it has in New Hampshire. And it's going to be picked up by the McKesson Corporation, which is a big healthcare distribution and logistics company. And McKesson will bring the vaccine from the manufacturing site to its hub where the vaccine orders are going to be packed, and they'll figure out, okay, this batch is going there, this batch is going there. They'll partner the vaccine shipments with kits of ancillary supplies that will help people administer the vaccine. So those are items like gloves, needles, alcohol prep pads, masks, and so forth. And then UPS and FedEx will take the vaccine that final mile to the place where it's going to be administered. And, one more note on the journey that these vaccines are taking. For Moderna, the storage of the vaccine is a little bit more flexible. It doesn't need quite these ultra cold temperatures that Pfizer does. So it's easier to move this vaccine and store it because it can be kept in regular freezers, quote unquote. These are still freezers intended for pharmaceuticals, as opposed to the ultra cold temperatures that the Pfizer vaccine requires while it's being stored. So those Pfizer vaccines either need a special ultra cold freezer that puts the vaccine at Arctic temperatures, or it needs to be kept on dry ice if they're going to store the vaccine before it's shot into the arm.
When it comes to the timeline on who gets the vaccination first and then the next group, etc., have there been any changes from Governor Cuomo's initial announcement on how that would be distributed?
The federal government's role is to distribute it to the states, and then the state's going to give it to nursing home residents and staff first, and then it's going to be sort of frontline healthcare workers, followed by healthcare workers more generally. And then just as the federal government gives it to the states and the states decide where to give it to within the state, the state is going to give it to hospitals and distribution centers around the state, and then the hospitals will decide which individuals receive it from there. And as for after these early batches that are going sort of to the most vulnerable and to the frontline healthcare workers, I don't know that there's been a full plan yet about how the general public is going to be vaccinated. Emilie, do you know of any information otherwise?
Yeah, so a bit of clarification that I would add is the hospitals will decide how to prioritize their own healthcare staff and healthcare workers. But as far as the general public, hospitals are not going to be deciding how to prioritize the general public, who they may be vaccinating down the road over the next few months. Instead, the state has a plan for how it will order people. And every state has come up with their own plan, and they've submitted it to the CDC.
It seems like that's kind of the big question for the general public is, when will the vaccine be available for me? Is there still any continued concern about the timeline and how quickly this vaccine was approved and is now already being, sent out to states? I know that that's something that the governor mentioned that the public was concerned about. There have been previous polls that show a high percentage of folks who were concerned about the political nature of the vaccine process. Has that been alleviated?
So my response to that would be, within the FDA, this vaccine has been evaluated by career scientists as well as an outside panel of doctors who received every shred of analysis coming out of the multi-month clinical trials that Pfizer performed on this vaccine. And they've overwhelmingly decided that the benefits of this vaccine outweigh the risks. Now, there's still holes in the information we have on this vaccine, and Pfizer is continuing to study that. So there's interest among doctors in getting more information about certain parts of this vaccine. For example, for individuals with severe egg allergies who may also have reactions to certain kinds of lipids, are they able to take this vaccine without having a reaction? They also want more study on the impact of the vaccine on pregnant women, and more study on the impact of the vaccine on adolescents who are 16 and 17 years old, because younger children, children 12 and up, were only admitted into the vaccine trials in October. However, the vaccine in its emergency use authorization, which is what was approved last week, the vaccine is allowed to be given to people age 16 and up. So they want to make sure that they study that age bracket of 16 and 17-year-olds more. But I know in New York, Governor Cuomo also convened a panel of scientists and doctors who took their own independent look at the data from Pfizer, and they concurred with the FDA that this vaccine should receive an emergency use authorization. And other states also had similar panels. I have not heard of a state whose independent advisory panel suggested that state residents should not take the vaccine.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you both kind of giving a lay of the land of what's going on right now here at the Capitol as well as around the country. And as always, I know we Times Union reporters will continue to bring the latest and greatest. So I always encourage folks to check timesunion.com for the latest news and updates on the topics we discussed today, as well as other topics that we might not have mentioned in today's podcast, but we'll probably mention in another one next time around. So thank you to Ed McKinley and Emilie Munson for joining me. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back with more on the Capitol Confidential podcast.
If you're enjoying Capitol Confidential, be sure to check out its sister podcast, The Eagle. I'm Jessica Marshall. Join me each week as we take a look inside the newsroom at the Times-Union, the Capital Region's oldest and largest newspaper. We'll discuss the week's top stories, and we'll talk to the award-winning reporters who write them. Listen at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Capitol Confidential podcast. I'm Amanda Fries. State Senator-elect Michelle Hinchey successfully won the 46th Senate District in the November 3rd election. She bested Rensselaerville Republican challenger Rich Amador during the count of absentee ballots. The Saugerties Democrat is following her late father, longtime Congressman Maurice Hinchey, into public service. I recently spoke with Hinchey via Zoom. Take a listen to our conversation. Your father had a long career in politics, and I'm kind of curious. I imagine that's kind of what influenced you a little bit. Are there similarities between you and your father when it comes to the issues and the causes that you're most interested in and have championed over the years?
Definitely. I grew up seeing firsthand, as I said, how this is supposed to work. I learned this. We would have messages on our answering machine, of people who needed help when we would come home when I was young and play it and hear that. My dad and I would go back to school shopping at the Hudson Valley Mall, and a trip that should have taken an hour maybe would take 4 hours, because we would stop and talk to everyone who came up to us. And I heard those conversations, everything from "Thank you so much, you helped my mother be able to stay in her home," to "Please help me, I can't get my veterans benefits," and that really shapes how you see the world, especially for me at a really early age. And seeing him championing a lot of things, especially the environment. He personally was so far ahead of his time on renewable energy and solar energy and protecting our environment, clean air and clean water laws. He wrote the first here in New York State when he was in the assembly. And here we are in 2020, still having that conversation, right? Still battling and trying to champion these same things, which is a big piece of why I'm running. Climate change is real. And we need to be doing a lot more for it. It's great that here in New York, we have the CLCPA, but we've got to make sure that we're really hitting those goals and hopefully going beyond those goals if we're really going to do something. Today's news from the New York State Comptroller is really exciting, divestment in a way that still protects people's money, right? We've got to make sure that we're not losing those funds, but we also have to send a signal that this is a serious issue. And so for me, not just on the more broad capacity, but on clean water. Across our district in the 46, we have a lot of communities that don't have access to clean water. What? But whether it's 100-year-old water infrastructure in some of our communities, or it's other avenues that have been contaminated by PFAS or other chemicals, we've got to make sure that we're protecting our resources. It's the only way that we can continue to live, and especially in upstate.
So what are you looking forward to doing first, or tackling first, once you get into office, outside of COVID relief packages? Because I know pretty much everybody has their eye on addressing those concerns. I'm kind of curious, beyond that, what else you're hoping to tackle and champion?
Yeah, a lot of things we were talking about and reasons I was running in the first place are actually tied unfortunately, really well into the COVID pandemic. The need for broadband, right? We've been finally talking a lot about it, but that's something that we've been talking about well before COVID really impacted our communities. We have areas and large communities, large swaths of land that just don't have access to the internet. And again, in 2020, that's unconscionable. Right. And making sure that no matter where you live, no matter where you choose to live, you have access to the resources that most people, consider a utility, right? That most people expect you to have. So that's something that we desperately need to work on. Rural healthcare and rural home care is another one. From my personal story with my dad, showed me firsthand how bad and broken our healthcare system is. You could think as a congressman, He could have had some of the best health insurance. And we actually had to sell land to pay for his home care. And if that's what we were facing, I'm sorry, but what in the world is everybody else facing? And we're still dealing with those repercussions. We're still dealing with the financial fallout of that. And that's horrible. That in the moment of the worst moment of their life, this should not be something that they need to have an added stress or an added burden, especially in home care and long-term care. And in more of our rural and suburban communities, there's a huge economic development model actually to expand that, right? And to create jobs, to make sure that there are more home care workers and that we're paying them accordingly. And that they have the training and the skill set to do it. That's huge. It's critical. So I think something that we desperately need to focus on. And then, of course, the other piece is economic development and jobs and small business. Again, how it dovetails into COVID, but we needed it before then. Our small businesses and our main streets are the backbones of many of our communities here. They're the ones that are shelling out for the Little League team. In Saugerties, we have one of our very own is a finalist on The Voice. It's really exciting, and Sawyer Motors, shout out to Sawyer Motors, who, is working with the town to set up, drive-through screenings of the show, right? And billboards and celebratory moments so that we can all come together. And we've got to figure out how not just to increase our small businesses and make it easier for small businesses to function in our upstate communities and to stay in business, but especially after the pandemic to come back, right? How are we incentivizing landlords to find thriving businesses to go into their vacant storefronts, right? How are we building and supporting incubator programs for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, communities that may not have originally a pathway or the mentorship to start their own, right? This is a perfect moment to do that because we really need it.
One of the other things I wanted to touch on, I find most interesting, especially having covered several parts of the state over my years as a journalist. Often I hear this whole upstate, downstate divide, and you had talked about during your campaigning, bringing a strong voice for upstate to Albany. And I'm kind of curious, I see it a lot with the downstate legislators. They've built a coalition and they seem to, there's a core group of them that are like-minded and seem to be on the same page with a lot of issues. And I'm curious whether you think there can be that among upstate senators.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We have a whole new crop of upstate senators in the majority, right? There's 5 of us who really have flipped seats, and that represents another 1.5 million New Yorkers who haven't been represented in the majority conference. That's exciting and quite staggering, a number, right? And so I think there's a lot. I know that the current members are really excited about the new diversity that we have and the perspectives that we're bringing. They know they've been a little bit more heavy one way than the other, and we've had some really great engagement and really great conversations about it. And I think there's a lot of things that go hand in hand. We are all there because we want to support New York State as a whole. Right? We're there to represent our districts and we're there to fight for the people that elected us, but we're also there to represent New York State as a whole. And a lot of it, especially as it pertains to agriculture, go hand in hand, especially after COVID, when you need to build back in those and you need to fill some of those restaurants, bring restaurants back and the bar scene back. Let's work with upstate agriculture communities. Let's work with our upstate farmers. Let's make sure that we're doing that in a way that best serves all of our communities. And I think there's a real tangible way to do that now with having all of us at the table.
You kind of touched on this with your last response, but just want to toss this back out to you. When it comes to, working with other upstate legislators, what are the issues you think you can coalesce around?
Yeah, upstate issues are upstate issues, right? And so it's everything from broadband to rural suburban home care and access to healthcare resources. First responders, EMS services are things we absolutely need to support. In my district alone, we have one whole county that doesn't have a hospital in it. That's Greene County. And so, first responders and EMS services are critical, especially for people who live on the mountaintop. So bolstering and expanding those services for our more rural communities. again, job development is huge and critical across the board, and access to food. I mean, whether you live in one of our upstate cities, our more downstate, or in our more rural suburban communities, access to quality food is really important. And I think for those of us who either live amongst or near our small family farms, making sure that they continue to thrive, start to thrive, right? Grow back better, is an important thing that I think we all have to coalesce around.
Now, when it comes to the state's budget deficit, how do you think it should be addressed? Obviously, there's plenty of legislators who actually, I think that they had a call, pushing for legislators to come back to Albany before the end of the year and, pass revenue raisers, taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers, as well as relief packages for those who are struggling in the state. I'm curious, where do you fall on that line of, taxing wealthy New Yorkers and addressing the budget deficit?
Yeah, I've been very open about this throughout our campaign. I do not believe that we can run on an austerity budget, talk about the need to support our first responders and EMS services. We cannot be cutting those services. We can't be cutting our school budgets. We can't be cutting our hospitals. We should not be bearing our middle class people and the people who have nothing to do with this crisis should not be bearing the brunt of our financial crisis that we're facing in the state. I don't support a tax across middle class people, working families, but I do support a incremental increase on the ultra wealthy that live among us, who many of whom have made an additional $4 billion during this pandemic, while the rest of us try to put food on the table and are trying to figure out if we'll have a job in 2 weeks. Right? This is a moment where we need to be creative about the ways that we're raising revenue. I also support more creative revenue measures, right? I mean, I think that we need to focus and we need to pass the legalization of cannabis, not just because I think we're a little behind the times on that, and that it will raise kind of immediate revenue, but also, especially for upstate New York, I think about it as an entire new economic development sector with industrialized hemp. Right? How it'll help our agricultural communities, as well as if we could get rid of plastics, it's a game changer for our environment, right? And that's something that we could be doing and leading the way on here in upstate New York, which would be have a huge economic development or economic impact.
I've heard from a couple of politicos, have remarked upon your success in a district that was drawn by Republicans. Now, based off of voter registration, there's a slight, advantage for Democrats. There's some more Democrats than there are Republicans, but it is considered a swing district. I'm kind of curious if you would like to comment just when it comes to the way your district is drawn. Do you think it did play a role either way in how you campaigned as well as your success in the election?
Yeah, there is a slight Democratic voter advantage. There's also about, I think, 50,000 unaffiliated voters, right? And so I think historically, many of those have skewed a bit more conservatively, which is why the district was drawn, as you pointed out, by the Republican majority to create an additional Republican seat. And, for us, it's really exciting to flip the seat, not just in a partisan way, but in a way that meant that our message resonated with a lot of people, regardless of party affiliation, right? I mean, the issues that we are really talking about, I believe, are not partisan, right? Access to broadband should not be a partisan issue. Job development and bringing in good paying jobs really shouldn't be a partisan issue. Access to quality, affordable healthcare for our aging parents and our aging friends and relatives should not be a partisan issue. Protecting clean water should not be a partisan issue. And really framing all of that for the future. What does the future of our community look like? How is the best way that we can actually get benefits back to the people that live here, that grew up here and that choose to live here? The best way to do that is to be in the majority, to fight for these basic things that we're talking about that we haven't seen in decades, right? And so for us, we were really set on, I'm proud to be a Democrat, but really set on making sure that people knew that we're here to represent people, regardless of where you may fall on the sides of certain issues. We're here to make sure that you get your fair share and the things that you need to be successful in your community, to make sure your kids are successful in our community and that they can grow up and they can stay here. What does the future look like?
Those are all my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything we haven't touched on you think is important to understand about, you taking the seat in the 46th district come January?
No, I mean, your questions were great. I'm really excited to do it. I'm excited for the opportunity. I'm humbled by all of the voters. I know it was a long process for many of us, but there's a lot of really good work to do that can make sure that not only can we thrive, but we can really be on the forefront of a lot of innovative activity here in upstate. And so that, our kids can stay here and be really proud of where they live and have a really meaningful job and life. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do in that world. And I'm really excited to do it.
That's it for this episode. The Capitol Confidential podcast is produced by the Times Union. Our editor is Jessica Marshall. Our music is courtesy of David Lombardo. For more of our coverage of New York State politics and government, check out Capitol Confidential blog at timesunion.com. Until next time, I'm Amanda Fries.